Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Peter Rossi, a private equity-backed Chief Technology Officer. We're going to talk about the journey from McLaren to private equity and everything that happened in between. Peter, if you can share a brief insight into you, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm Peter Rossi, based in the UK, just outside of London. I'm a technologist by trade over the last 25 years. Although sort of over the last 15, that became a hell of a lot more commercial, I suppose. I started my career in Formula One with McLaren, sort of ran trackside IT for them, traveled around the world in a number of interesting environments. It was really good fun, went to a lot of parties. So after that, moved into sort of consulting, did a lot of work across sort of managed service providers, sort of insurance, finance, banking, and then did some public sector related stuff. So around 2008, I was really keen to get involved in the venture capital space, particularly around tech startups, something that I'd always wanted to do. So got involved primarily doing tech due diligence for sort of a number of smaller funds, sort of helping them to understand their, sort of what it was they're actually investing in. What was it, real, or was it a picture on a slide there? You'd be amazed some of the stuff that was going on there. Did that for a number of years. Whilst doing that, also, I worked in a VC-backed sort of cloud business focused on the public sector, scaled that up. I ended up focusing on sort of running the sales team there for the sort of health and life sciences sector, and did a lot of work in the genetics world, which was good fun. While doing that, also built a SaaS company in the certification space, particularly around ISO 27001. So it sort of helped help businesses achieve and manage ISO 27001. It's a space that I ended up spending a lot of time in, which I never really planned on spending in. I don't think anybody sort of grows up as a 5-year-old thinking that they want to get into ISO certification and think, that's my future. And I ended up accidentally sort of drifting into sort of 10 odd years in that space. Sold that SaaS business in 2021 into a PE-backed entity. Got to know that team really well. Saw an interesting future with them. They were just coming to an end of a cycle. So help them package that up, get through due diligence and sell it on. Took it through exit, and then went on to acquire. We were been an interesting sort of last 4 years, acquiring sort of 22 businesses across 4 continents and getting those integrated into our into the portfolio. But yeah, that's sort of mainly what I've been doing, and that's me. That's me.
Perfect. Appreciate the insights. So what's one mistake that you see the private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
I think it's, the early stages, particularly, sort of the first time a business goes into PE, so sort of that 2 to 20 million of EBITDA sort of range. So the planning is probably too rigid, right? And fundamentally, it's a really ambiguous stage. You don't know exactly what's going to be coming around the corner, what opportunities are available to you, and what you're going to do. I think, M&A strategy there is one of the key ones. Everybody goes out with this sort of very well-defined view of what it is they're actually going to acquire. We're going to acquire businesses that look exactly like us, and integrate them in, and we'll just take their EBITDA and it's all going to be nice and easy. But the reality is, you can only acquire what's available in the market, right? You go out, you look, you talk to people, opportunities arise. And then at that point, you're faced with some interesting decisions that you need to make around, is this clean enough for us to acquire? Is it what we actually need? Invariably there's, a business might do 60, 70, 80% of what your core business is, and, what your core clean EBITDA is that you want to pull in. The other sort of 10, 20, 30% of it is something else. And then again, you might think with regards to your strategy, right, well, it's fine, we'll just carve that out. and drop it, but invariably you quite often see that those are anchor products. And that's the reason why the other 60, 70% of EBITDA exists. So you can't get rid of it. And that's always a fun phase. I think it is a complicated phase, so those early stages when you're sort of growing that business sort of through its first private equity cycle, understanding what's out there, what you can do from an M&A perspective, what opportunities are available, how you then actually integrate those and the decisions that you need to make afterwards. Um, Overall, I think it is just that, sort of the planning phase is maybe, too rigid. You just need to plan a bit more for ambiguity in that as you move forwards.
So just diving into that a little bit more, do you think that that sounds like a bit like to me like it's a bit of a marketing problem at the origination stage, but that's probably too simplistic. Do you think that sits at the origination stage and that working harder to originate more deals that are more along the great fit, or do you think that that's the more of the broadening of the playbook to acquire good fits rather than great fits?
I still think ultimately it still comes down to what's available in the market, right? It doesn't matter how good your origination is, you've still got to look at what's out there. And very rarely are things going to fit into that exactly how you want them to. It's the same way that, you see it in startups with, sort of talent advisors describing, the perfect CTO or the perfect salesperson. And they spend ages writing a job spec and it's like, great, okay, you've just defined a unicorn. Let's see whether or not you can hire them. And as it turns out, funnily enough, they don't exist. You can only talk to who's in the market and bring them in. It's then about them sort of accepting that and going, right, okay, what was it that I really need? What's really important to me? What things am I willing to accept? What things am I not willing to accept? And how am I going to do that? Again, you see it with, VC funds setting up saying that they only invest in, IP defensible businesses that have got a strong moat and they go on to become a unicorn. It's like, great, brilliant. Where are you finding those?
The Before I dive into kind of meat and drink of the podcast, I'm always intrigued by the what I'd say kind of world class company background and how that shapes. Now I know it's difficult when you're in that to go, well, I don't know, because if I didn't have it, then I'd be able to tell you what I'm missing. I wouldn't even be able to tell you that potentially. But what did you take from McLaren that shaped you in the work that you're doing now and the work that you've done before, being in, what would be incredibly high performance type organization?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the interesting things about that is that yes, it is incredibly high performance and it's hard work. I think the reality is that again, ambiguity and is key, right? Things change, and you got to be able to operate in those environments quickly with precision. So, for example, during a race, you might get rain, for example, or there's a thunderstorm, tornado. There's the connectivity goes down back to base. What do you do? How do you deal with these problems? Happens all the time. And it's, these can be quite scary, right? It happens under pressure, right? And you definitely know how you operate under pressure when, a service goes down and you've got, the team principal yelling at you over the radio as to why they can't send the car out. You've got millions of people watching that. It definitely shapes you. I think, sort of from that perspective, though, I've always found it quite interesting because a lot of the time there aren't answers, particularly in those sort of environments where you've got to build a solution that works in a certain way that will also operate in, 50 degrees heat in a garage with, a lot of sand and dust and people walking past it. Those solutions don't exist out there, right? So it makes you sort of become sort of you think a bit more laterally, I suppose. What else can we do? How can we build this? Who can I work with to achieve this goal? It's unlikely to come off the shelf, but how can we achieve this? And I think a lot of that plays into my day to day. Really, I don't, I see interesting problems. Things are rarely as pressing as some of the stuff that you might have seen trackside, but it's sort of thinking, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Where, what can we come up with? What's different? Because people probably haven't seen these things before. It's like, what can we do to solve it? I think that's probably where it shapes me the most.
What's the biggest misconception P investors have about running portfolio companies?
I think that was I think I answered that one around the M&A strategy and being too planned originally.
Sorry, within mistakes. Yeah, apologies. Absolutely right. Which growth lever do you believe most leads? Okay, so which growth lever, pricing, M&A, ops, talent, do you believe that most leaders underestimate?
Well, interestingly, I think it's how the leadership typically professionalizes over time, right? You sort of early doors with a business, it's typically founder led, and then over time, particularly as it moves into PE, you'll have a more professional team come in. But at the earlier stages, those teams are from people that have either, they've built businesses, they're doers, operators, they've grown on that, they've gone on that journey themselves, and sort of have quite a high tolerance for potential problems or ambiguity. And actually that tolerance for tolerance for failure, tolerance for problems is really key to enabling a business to grow, particularly if it's tech enabled. You're sort of threading the eye of the needle a lot of the time around high growth, integrations, new products, new territories, new languages, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and grow the business, but with limited budget, obviously, and trade-offs around that. That comes with risk, right? Things aren't always going to be perfect, but actually, if you can achieve 80-90% of it, then great. The What happens or tends to happen as that leadership team sort of professionalizes further and it goes through various iterations over growth, those people have never lived that sort of startup sort of phase of a business. They've never been through that. And where's it going today? Where are we going to pivot it? What have we got to do to actually achieve the goals here? Like, oh God, this is really not going well. All of those sorts of things. And that, their careers have come from, operating entirely in perfection, imperfection. They need to, everything needs to work first time. They've built their reputations on things being correct, and well thought out. The downside of that typically though is, particularly as the rest of the business is growing with it, the people then start hedging. So rather than, you definitely notice this in the teams, and sort of how their, sort of the culture changes. They sort of go from, yeah, it's great, I've got this idea, let's go and implement this. I've got this thing that we can do. I've got a great idea for a product. I think we can probably throw together a proof of concept over the next couple of days and, we can demo it. And then that, fear of not getting it right first time starts to come in, and things really start to slow and people really start hedging. And it suddenly goes from I've got this great idea for a proof of concept and being able to do that in, over the course of a couple of days, to give me a couple of months and I'll write a spec. And then they want more and more buy-in from people so that they feel like they've got the air cover before they go and do it. So I think, as that sort of tolerance for failure starts to drop as the team professionalizes, like the pace of delivery and pace of growth can also start slowing as well. It's a tricky thing, because obviously, everybody should be striving for perfection or at least getting better or improving. But the reality is, if you get that wrong, it can really, really slow down a business.
Okay. And if you were talking about growth, EBITDA, if you were to double EBITDA and a goal to double EBITDA in 3 years, what are the things that you would first look at in order to deploy your playbook?
Um, yeah, I think that over the course of a PE cycle, there's a whole number of different things that you've got to sort of look at and keep your eye on. The way I tend to sort of think of it, or the way I've ended up describing it in the past, is around sort of, it's a bit like a TV show, right? It's you're in a new series of that TV show. For this PE cycle, you've got, the pilot episodes come in, you've just launched, you've got new money in the bank, new plans, new acquisitions, new characters, stuff that you're going to do, you're going to crack on. It's an interesting plot. Over the course of that series, there's obviously a story arc that plays out over the course of the episodes, and that ultimately is your exit that you're trying to get to at the end of it. So you've always got to keep one eye on where that's going and what you're trying to achieve over the course of it. But the reality is there's a number of plot twists along the way, with regards to acquisitions that have come in that you haven't necessarily planned for, or new products or services and things that you need to deal with. You've got cameos coming in from different acquired business owners or new stakeholders, or sort of new senior members of the team coming in. Potential network cancellations from the PE firm saying you're not hitting your numbers, or or just in general you may not just be hitting your numbers, and things that you need to do to fix that. So yeah, I think the reality is over that time frame is that a lot of stuff happens. How do you actually, what would be my favorite for increasing EBITDA is, I think, well, doubling EBITDA over that window is to simplify, really. Stick to that core product set that you're working on. Don't get distracted by it. Keep selling that product, keep acquiring in that market. Be ruthless about cutting products that you don't necessarily need, that aren't adding value, and sort of be clear about that up front. What else was I going to say? Sort of technology itself, I always feel is, I'm not a technologist for technology's sake. That drives a lot of technologists nuts. I'm not a particular fanboy about any particular technology or ways of doing things. I think there's, a number of different frameworks and strategies and best practice that you can look at that changes on a week to week basis. The reality is about sort of how you actually use that and deploy it. Got to look at what are the commercial goals of the business? Where are you actually trying to get to? What are you trying to achieve? And then lean into the way that the business is already working. One of the biggest challenges that I've always seen is less about actually the technology or how it's built or how it's deployed. It's much more about change management within the user base. So, the staff that are in that business and how they're going to adopt it and how they're going to cope with change, particularly from acquisitions. It's always a hearts and minds game. Being a CTO really is much more about that and communication than it is about technology decisions a lot of the time. From a tech perspective, and whether that's internal or external, it's it's just sort of leaning into where people already are, what they're doing, how do they work already, what are the customers doing, how they're interfacing with your business, and just remove as much friction from that as possible. You might come up with a great idea to re-platform, or we need to move all of our ERP to SAP or Salesforce or Dynamics. Like, okay, great, but reality is, is that actually going to make your customers' lives easier, and is it going to grow your EBITDA?
So you mentioned that one of the big challenges is the internal communications. You've made acquisitions. You've got to buy the hearts and minds of people of yet another change in a private equity backed world, common practice. What was some of the what was so acquisition number one versus acquisition number 22? What was the difference that you did from a comms perspective that you wish you'd just done on one, but it took you till 22 or maybe 15, 10 to
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The playbook for acquisitions and integrations had changed a lot over that time frame. There are so many unknown unknowns as you go into these things. You start off with a plan. You think these are all the bits that we need to know, and then you start pulling it through. You work through the project, and okay, there's 5, 6 things there that we didn't quite capture, and we update as we go, and try and make sure that we do that. A large part of that is sort of spending more time with the teams and the acquired businesses, particularly prior to, sort of switch over of core systems, or getting them to work in a way that we want them to work, and ensuring that they're, sort of fully bought into what we're doing and why we're doing it. and that they feel supported. That was the thing that really, more than anything else, made a big difference. It wasn't about, you know, ETL pipelines and data transformation and, sort of building products and feature sets. It was much more about just spending time with the teams in those businesses to make sure that they were happy and aligned to what it was that we were trying to do.
What do you read, watch, listen to? Do you recommend that others check out, please?
Um, Yeah, I listen to a number of podcasts, particularly around sort of PE, VC, and tech. The other thing is from a reading perspective, I got introduced to Blinkist a few years ago, and if you've used it, so it's a great way of absorbing books and sort of getting the key points out of them sort of quickly, with a view to whether or not you're going to go back and read the whole thing. It's made me incredibly well read, or at least appear to be well read. The downside, the downside being, is that you can sometimes overdo it, because it will they will summarize a full novel down into a sort of a 10-15 minute audiobook that sort of just summarizes the key points. And I went out on a dog walk one afternoon, and I listened to 3 books on ancient Greek philosophy and Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, and my brain nearly exploded. Yeah, so that's the only thing. There's too much of a good thing sometimes.
And if anybody wishes to reach out, how best to get in touch, please?
Yeah, sure. So obviously LinkedIn's a good one. My email address is peter@zpventures.com, and you can get hold of me there. But yeah, sort of feel free to reach out, connect, say hello.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
All right. Thanks very much, Alex.
Thank you for everybody for tuning in yet again to the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it.